Hello, friends. I am so glad that you're here. It's Arlene Smith, Healing the Hearts of Healthcare. Welcome to today's session. And I am so excited to be sharing and co-hosting with a very dear friend of mine, someone who is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to introduce her, but I'm going to actually ask Veronica Barber to actually tell you a little bit about herself and her experience. And believe it or not, we used to work together as consultants with this mission that was, working together to really bring harmony, love, compassion, and just really amazing things to all of the centers in long-term care. So Veronica, thank you so much for joining today. But why don't we start by just telling the audience a little bit about your background?
I will, certainly. And thank you, Arlene, for inviting me. One thing I'll just say publicly for everyone to hear is that I think the universe finds us people,
Yes, it
right?
does.
Soul connections that we're supposed to meet when we're in our earthly experience. And I feel like Arlene and I were meant to meet each other. And we have a very similar purpose in life. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to where we feel we're driven and where our life is leading us in terms of what that purpose is. So we're very aligned in that regard. And so I love being able to be a part of your podcast. And a little bit about myself. I'm going to go back because we're really talking about individuals who have worked in the healthcare entity. And my journey began as a very small child visiting my great grandmother in the nursing home.
Ah,
And my sisters and I would run up and down the hallways. And before my great grandmother went to the nursing home, I surprisingly have a few memories of her. When I was very, very young, I would help her put on her, I don't even know if they were called TThe stockings at the time, but
yeah.
I recall helping her put on these very thick stockings. And I'd kneel down on the floor and I'd try to yank them up and help her. And there was just something about it that it was just our connection. It was
Yeah.
my way of connecting with her. And then she was in the nursing home. And so we would visit at least 2, 3 times a week. And I later, fast forward, when I was 18, I became a nursing assistant. I did that for over 10 years in a nursing home setting, a hospital setting, and on an ALC unit, and then as well home health care. And it just was probably, when I look back on all the jobs that I've had, that work will always be at the top in terms of the most fulfilling work I think I've ever
Yeah.
done in my career. The hardest physically, luckily I was in my 20s at the time,
Right, right.
late teens, 20s, but really hard on me physically. I hurt my back at one point and I've forever have had back issues because of it. Wasn't lifting correctly, couldn't get anybody to help me.
Right.
So
So we were like,
we all have
charge
those
on, right?
stories.
Yes.
But truly the most fulfilling work I've ever done. I later, I've gone to college, I've got a bunch of degrees. I later became a nursing home administrator. I eventually became a chief operating officer of a large health system. My passion was really on the people. I found that I became far more interested in caring more about the people we employed than the people we served. I will always love older adults and they always have a special place. But my focus really began to shift towards the people we employed, worrying about them, caring for them, making sure that they were heard and seen and their needs were met. So that, it's kind of like being on the airplane, right?
Yeah.
We need to put our oxygen mask on first. And so I wanted to make sure that they had what they needed. And so that began a journey of me moving more into people services. We think of that traditionally as human resources.
Right.
And that was a little bit of a career shift. And, around that time, I began consulting. I started my own company. Then I joined forces for the consulting firm that Arlene and I found
Yeah.
ourselves working for at the same point. I still do work for that consulting firm and thoroughly enjoy it. But my full time work is that that I teach at a university. I live outside of Boston, so I work at a university in the Boston area, and I teach full time, mostly management, leadership courses, and some human resources courses. So that's kind of my full time gig. My passion, obviously, I love teaching, but my bigger passion is really that I'm an emotional intelligence coach.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, my mission on this planet is to heal its people,
Yes.
to heal the earth. And the way I do it primarily is through really helping every individual that I connect with to be more attuned to their thoughts, their feelings, how they're navigating life day to day. And it's really a journey of growing their emotional intelligence competencies. So, whether it's teaching, consulting, coaching, the theme here is, and I think this is going to be a big theme of our talk today, is just really getting connected, right, to how
Yeah.
you're feeling, how you're engaging minute by minute. And that really falls under the umbrella of emotional intelligence.
I
So
would
that was the
agree.
short version, Arlene.
I love it. Listen, I'm always blown away at your accomplishments and everything that you've done in this world. And I too firmly agree with you. We were destined to meet because we both have that sort of same belief system, right? And I think one of the things that really drew me into this, I call it like I was compelled to speak about this message of healing the hearts of healthcare because living through COVID and serving as a nurse that pushed a med cart and kept a journal every single day, in those moments, I never really understood the why. I really still don't. It's only now that I see, there was a purpose there. And it was to use some of those words to make this recognition that in the field of healthcare, we all need healing. And let's face it, in our world, everybody needs healing. But as healthcare workers, because we are exposed every single day to this practice of healing someone else, energy obviously is dispersed in that exchange. But at the same time, we are exposed to so many things that are outside of our control, right? And that influence us and impact us. So I call it the great sadness when we think about the healing that we need to come to a place at where, it's like peeling those layers of that onion away where we say, no longer am I going to allow those feelings to live in my heart anymore and all that guilt and that pain and that suffering. And I feel like I'm on a journey just to help people see that there is hope there. You can still connect your passion to purpose. You can still do the great work that you were designed to do, and it's why you are here. And I'm excited to talk to you even just about sort of, how we've gotten here in terms of the way our brains work. And again, I always feel like when I have a conversation with you, I feel a little bit smarter, and I'm like, oh, look at me. I just feel like I'm a smarter person. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, honestly, I'm very fond of this idea of, a lot of this in the way in which we approach things in our day to day as healthcare workers is driven by, this brain that we have that, navigates us into the way in which we approach the world and the work that we do. So, tell me your thoughts on this, like when you just think about this from like sort of a high level sort of
Yeah.
picture.
And it's interesting. It just takes me to a visualization that if anyone's listening, if you're interested in trying it, but what I would recommend that you do is while I speak for the next couple of minutes, just close your eyes. Close your eyes. And I want you to think about the fact that, our brain and our bodies, we have these two communication devices. One is our thoughts, that sort of cognitive process, and we tend to live in that space quite a bit. But the other is emotions. And emotions are actually the primary filter for us of how we see the world, how we interpret it. So we've got these two communication devices, and we can think of them similar to our eyes and ears. So if your eyes are closed right now, imagine going through life where you chose to never open your eyes up again.
Mm,
And you only were going to go through life listening with your ears. That's what we do when it comes to our emotions and our thoughts. We go through life and we keep suppressing our emotions, we keep ignoring our emotions. And we only go through life with that cognitive process. That when we're not balancing our thoughts and our emotions, by the way, you can open your eyes right now if you're if you're ready, or if you're
Right.
just enjoying listening, keep them closed. But we often go through life and we ignore the emotions, stay hyper rational in our thought process, which only causes more distress,
Right.
sadly, right? But when we learn to view both our thoughts and our emotions as data, important data, and we learn to absorb and take in both of those data sets and combine them, it allows us to see the world differently. It allows us to conclude different conclusions, right?
Right.
It allows us to engage differently, make better decisions. And it ultimately enables us to live a far more far more satisfying life, both in our personal and professional, journey that we're
Yeah.
on. But often, those emotions, we we're not at a place where we feel we can even entertain them, and yet they're always there.
Right.
And what often happens is, as we suppress and suppress and ignore, it's like a volcano that ultimately explodes. And then they come out in a way that isn't really effective or productive for anybody,
Right.
right?
Right.
So we have to learn how to really sit in that space and recognize that emotion. And, there's great strategies that can teach us how to do that.
Yeah. So if you were, because I know this, you and I've had conversations. I know that you spend a lot of time even trying to influence some of the students, right, in your classes, really just to like learn these practices very, very early on. So if you were advising them and saying, I really want you to really think about this from a conscious state, right? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, yeah. I always start with just a little bit of education to say, we have what happens when our emotions, which are chemicals, right, flowing through our bodies. We actually have a 6-second window. And what happens is, as those chemicals start to kind of enter our cells, and they're slowly entering all our cells and flowing throughout our bodies, it almost as if you have like some raindrops
Mm-hmm.
dripping down on your head. And they're starting to enter our cells. We're starting to notice there's something going on. Now, within that 6 seconds, if we get to the 6 seconds, that's when it's like standing under a waterfall where the water is just flooding on top
Right.
of us. We have the ability to pause.
Right.
Think about an audio recording, right? We have the ability to hit pause. Once we start to feel the trickle of those raindrops, we can just stop. Now take in and start to understand the data that's coming to us. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way?
Right.
Blending our cognitive abilities, right, with our emotional um, sensing. Lots of times where we sense emotions without even realizing it is we sense them somatically. We're feeling it in our body somewhere. What am I feeling? Where am I feeling it? What is this telling me? What is this message telling me? What can I do with this? We always have a choice, right? We have a choice to be pulled by the neck and have our emotions take over and
Right.
have situations and people take over, and us sort of react, in not the most positive ways. Or we have a choice to choose us in those moments to say, okay, this is why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. What am I going to do? I
Right.
can do what I want to do. My instinct is to lash out, right? To say something not so nice, or to get angry, to go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. I can do all those types of things that are not going to be effective for me or the person in my presence. Or I can pause
Right.
and I can make that choice to say, in the long run, what do I want out of this situation? What do I want out of this relationship? And what should I do that would be the better reaction? We always have the ability to stop and catch ourselves before we say or do something. But we have to be really observant to know that emotions are starting to flood our bodies, those chemicals.
Yeah. I mean, you said that perfectly, and I almost feel as if I wish I had that advice, right, during the heart of COVID, right? Because, I've been very vulnerable, and I've shared with people just, in one of the earlier podcasts, I was having an interview with a therapist who actually has an amazing podcast. And one of the things we talked about was how coming off those experiences, right, not recognizing that emotional response led to like overindulgence of eating and overindulgence of drinking. I said like, oh, there were times when I would come home from a shift after, working 16 hours during the period of COVID, and then, feeling like I probably ate about 7,000 calories in about 30 minutes, right? And then, consumed about 3/4 of a bottle to a bottle of wine, right? And I think that is a perfect example of not having that ability to kind of have that built-in sort of pause.
And our brains are built on, it's kind of like a computer, right? We're this incredible CPU.
Right.
And so our brains love auto processes.
Yes.
And that's how our habits get formed because there's so much data that our brain would normally have to be taking in. And anytime we're learning something new, just think about how exhausting it is to learn it. The first day on the job, first week, first month, going to college, taking a new course, whatever it is, it's mentally and physically draining when we're in that learning mode. So our brain is its most efficient when it creates these auto
Yeah.
processes. And so out of that comes, unfortunately, good or bad habits. Many of us are just on autopilot in how we react. If I'm feeling this way, I ignore the feeling, but my behavior is always this behavior. I might go to food and eat food, which has always been my autopilot mode
Mine
as
too.
well.
I'm on a
Uh,
journey to fix that.
I have a
Right?
friend who drinks. That's
Right.
how he manages life, right? He's always reaching for alcohol.
Right.
So, I just was on a coaching call right before, I joined this podcast, and we were talking about the coaching client that I had. She was working through one of her leaders and how the leader always reacts defensively. She's not able to be open and receptive to feedback.
Right.
So we all have these sort of, I would say, defensive mechanisms, these auto processes
Hmm.
that we have created as a way to sort of protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And what's interesting with that, there's a lot of science. The last couple of decades, there's been so much research done in that neuroscience space, and we're learning so much about the brain. Now, I might have a bunch of degrees and I have a doctorate, but I'm not a neuroscientist. So anything I share on this call is really coming from some incredible authors and researchers that I'm familiar with. But what happens with our brain is we have this sort of natural negativity bias that's
Right.
built in. And it's almost like our brains are still evolving, right? We go back to the caveman days
Oh yeah.
where our brains were equipped to be hypersensitive to a threat. You know, something's wrong. We have to be ready to protect ourselves so we can survive. And so we've got this little thing called the amygdala, and any nurse knows this, right?
Yep.
You probably know this better than I do, but we have this little part of our brain that's super sensitive to emotions and super sensitive to those threats or those opportunities. But the problem is the negative is just, it's like a tuning fork that is tuned at a much higher vibrational field
Yes.
than the positive. So what happens is we always stay in that, I always say, the dark
Yeah.
place.
The dark
We
place.
always stay in the dark place with that negative energy. And we've created these sort of super highways that as we go there, we stay there longer, we go there more frequently. And so, there's strategies, once again, that teach us how to get out of that.
Right.
But we very often sit in those sort of really negative, dark places.
Yeah. And I know when I look back sort of at my journals. In fact, there was a period probably about a year ago where I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna put all this in a book and write these down." And as I was going through page by page, I started getting darker and dark. I could feel that energy shift, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think we have this propensity to just naturally slide into that space, and I'm very, very fascinated by the idea of number one, just this recognition that like we've got to do better as human beings, just being self-aware that emotions are such a big driver. I used to tell people this all the time when I coach them as well, and I manage high performing teams, and I would say to people, you don't want to be that bus driver that's driving everybody to crazy town, right? Like you've lost that ability to sort of even just look at things from a perspective of logic and just taking that pause. That pause allows you to take that step back and that step up to see it from a different lens. And everybody that knows me knows that anytime I do any education, I really talk about looking at things from that step back and that step up look, right? And I jokingly say, my license says that I'm legit, right? Like 5'3". It's really not. I'm not that close to 5'3", but it makes me feel a little bit better. But when I get up on a step ladder at home and I start to do something, maybe I climb 2 or 3 steps, and I look sort of out at the world, I'm still mesmerized at how different my view tends to be, just looking at it from that 6-foot maybe view. And I jokingly say to my husband all the time, like, this is what you see every day. I feel robbed, right? But it's a reminder that we have to sort of make this conscious choice, right? To take that step back, to step up and look at it from a higher view, right? And I tend to do that through meditation. I always think, of our dear friend Mary Telesnayak, who, one time over dinner, I said to her, my brain just doesn't meditate. And she laughed at me and said, "You silly girl, everything's done through practice, right?" And it, probably about 20 times later, it really clicked for me. And I sort of surrendered to that space of just allowing myself that calm and quiet, right? So talk to us about that, right? Like that's how we get that pause and peace, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
power that comes from that.
Yeah. And, even before I get to that, I think I'm just reminded of the fact that because we've sort of built these super highways in our brain, sort of that neuroplasticity that takes us down to the dark,
Yes.
negative places that keep us fearful, keep us anxious. We're on these super highways and we have to build a mental off ramp
Yes.
that gets us to the positive. And the only way we build it is when we have the pause. And what we know about neuroscience is that our brains are, and because we've had now a lifetime of staying in the negative dark place, as I say, we're stuck there. We're
Right.
stuck there. Now we can build new neural plasticity, right?
Right.
Neural pathways, and to get off of there. But it's not when we just for 1 second think about something. Our emotions stick. They go to that data repository, those really strong emotions that tend to be the negative ones. Those are the ones that stick. They echo with us, they balance, they mirror back to us. That's why we stay in that place. The only way to get the positive ones to stick is to do 2 things. One is to shift the ratio.
Right.
So as you said, lift up,
Right.
right? We have to reframe constantly to start to see things differently. But the other thing, because this is all implicit memory, to get it to stick and stay, we have to stay there long enough
Yes.
so it'll retain. So I'll give you one thing that I do literally probably 4 times a day when I'm home.
Yeah.
I have a dog, and I just love her to death, as most animal lovers. We love our
Yeah.
animals, right? But maybe you have a child, or maybe you love the outdoors, whatever it is. I will count in my head at least for 10 seconds. And that's what we know the science tells us.
Yeah.
You've got to hold on to that thought of gratitude of joy, whatever it is, and I will stare into the eyes of my dog. And sometimes I start laughing, sometimes I start crying, my eyes tear up,
Right.
and I'm staring into her eyes and I'm saying, "Thank you." I always say, "Thank you, universe." I've always been a very religious person,
Yes.
but as I get older, I've moved more towards spirituality, and I'm always saying, whether it's thank you, God, thank you, universe, for bringing me this gift,
This moment. Yeah.
but you got to stay in it for at least 10 seconds. If I'm taking a walk outside, this is how we get present, right?
Right.
We slow all the thoughts. We treat them as a cloud. We let them float by. We learn that in meditation. But can I just look at the trees? Can I smell? Can I hear? Can I feel if there's a breeze going by? Can I notice the branches of the trees that are just shifting ever so slightly? Can I stay in that place and just receive it?
Yeah.
Just feel it, just receive it. I can do the same thing when I'm working and I'm washing my hands. Instead of counting to happy or singing
Happy
happy birthday in your
birthday.
head or
Right.
whatever the key was to have enough friction as you washed your
Yeah.
hands. What if instead of doing that, instead of being in that cognitive process, what if you're washing your hands and you're literally just feeling the grooves on your fingers as you do it? You're feeling the water touching your skin, being present, getting into that space of in that moment is really, as you said, Arlene, it's about, letting go. But we have to stay there long enough that it starts to become implicit and it gets embedded in our memory banks. Because then what happens if we have more positive moments throughout the day? When I was starting on this journey of really trying to shift the negativity in my life, because I was always glass half full, I was always angry with every little thing that happened to me. It was always, a perceived threat. I was always right, they were wrong. I
Right.
was always wronged, I was always the victim. So, when you think of all the bad ways we can be as a human being, I excelled at it. And so I had to every day, whether it was affirmations, meditation, mantras that I would say in my head, I struggled with things like judgment, control.
Right.
And I would throughout the day, several times a day, just do positive imagery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I flow like water, I bend like the palm tree. I didn't believe it at first, but then I started to say it all the time.
Right.
I would do different phrases that I'm open, I'm open to grace, that I'm grateful. And I would have all these, I don't even remember what they are anymore. I don't need to do them anymore. It's
Yeah.
become just who I
Who you
am,
are now. Yeah.
you know. But it's actively, just like we check off the list and we get a dopamine rush,
Right.
that really happens,
Right.
right? Our brain loves to
Absolutely.
literally, physically check off the list. We get that same dopamine rush and joy every time we switch gears, we get present, we get in that place of gratitude. But the key is to have it stick. Gotta sit in that space for at least 10 seconds. And I want everybody to try this after this call. I want you to notice how often you feel something positive and joyful or you have a moment of gratitude. Most of us do not hold on to it that long.
Correct.
We think of it for like maybe 3 seconds. But as you stay in that place for more than 10 seconds, you're starting to build new neuroplasticity. You're building that off ramp to the positive, to the mindfulness. And what happens is we just get to this place of calm and joy.
Yeah.
I could be so busy in the middle of the day. I just remember being in the nursing home with you just feel like there's a concrete brick that you're carrying that it's just weighing you down. There's so much to do. I'm so busy. But I could stop in every moment I'm having, whether it's an interaction with a resident, a family, another coworker, I could in that moment stop and say, what's really wonderful about this moment?
Yeah.
What's going on in this moment that really matters, you know? That really matters, that feels good.
I think
And
it's
you always can
just,
come up with something.
it's so beautiful. And it just leads me down this pathway of just imagination, right? Imagine what how this could really transform healthcare and the way we care for human beings, right? The way healing occurs, right? I mean, what we're saying is like everybody that works in healthcare, I mean, we were designed to be healers, right? This was what our gift to the universe is, right? We are healers. But really, if we really thought about it just from that lens of how could that transform the way care is delivered, just by taking that moment out in the busyness and the rush to just allow yourself to be present. How could that change the way you interact with maybe that patient, right? I noticed this when I was an oncology nurse. I mean, when I look back and I think about all of those memories, those deep memories, some of the best mentors I had as my nursing mentors in oncology would say to me, you have to take that time out just for presence to be with somebody. That has to be built into your routine if you are going to do this work successfully. And we don't always teach that and reinforce that in our healthcare system, in our education system, even through leadership and practices, right? With setting expectations on this is the way care should be delivered. And I think that is a byproduct sometimes of that internal feeling and struggle that we have that we just cannot be in a state of peace. If we're
Yeah.
not doing something, if we're not moving forward in every single situation that we come in, how dare we do that, right? It almost feels rebellious, like I'm being lazy. And I'm reprogramming those sort of off ramps in my brain to say, when my body needs rest, if I need to rest on a Saturday and do nothing, that is a good thing, right? I'm listening to the healing that needs to happen in my body because I do need to refresh myself. There was a time when I would feel naturally like conflicted, like I should be doing other things to fill that space and time. And I can't help but wonder how this could really transform the way care is delivered and the way healing happens.
Yeah. And think about this. What if we just slowed down? I think our strength comes from stillness.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think healing comes from being present. And one of the things that I do in one of the courses that I teach, I have something called Mindful Mondays.
Oh,
I teach a bunch of business students who want to go out there and work 70 hours a week and make a lot of money. And
right.
I'm trying to, in a very subtle way, help them to understand that they will be far happier, right? If they learn to do some of these just mindful practices. But the whole while that we take 5 minutes out on a Monday and I introduce them to different mindfulness practices, which a lot of organizations are doing now, right? So
Yes.
it's getting them
Thank
familiar with
goodness.
this is the way, thank goodness. The whole while I'm doing this, and think about this as healers, right? Most of us who've gone into the field, you know, I never became a nurse, but believe me, I'm the proudest of being a nursing home assistant out of
Yeah.
a nursing assistant out of any role I've ever had, right? And what I do now in my role, I'm still healing, but the way I heal from the minute those students start those mindfulness activities is the whole while I'm saying to myself, I'm sending you light. I'm
Right.
sending you love.
Love.
I'm sending you peace. I'm sending you joy. And I'm just mentally, visualizing my energy going into them, and we're getting brighter and lighter, and we're rising up as a group. When I was a nursing home administrator, before I ever had a meeting with an employee or a family member, I always was very prayerful, and I would say a quick prayer before. And I would say, Lord, please let me hear them.
Yeah.
Please let me deeply hear them. Let me deeply feel them so that I can be receptive to what I need to know. And I've carried that philosophy and that approach in any interactions I've had in any other professional capacity. No matter what I'm doing, can I be present enough that I'm really hearing, I'm really seeing? We know that communication, a very small percentage of communication is the words.
Hmm.
The majority of communication is our paralanguage, right? The tone, the pitch, the volume, the
Right.
pace, and all the nonverbals. Am I paying attention? Am I seeing it? Am I hearing it? And can I send my soothing, calming joy, peace your way so it can relieve you? We often think of healing as doing. The older I get, the more I follow different spiritualists
Right.
and learn from them. Um, Healing is stillness
And presence. Yeah.
and presence, you know. I just, you would love this, Arlene. When I was in Florida a couple of weeks ago, I went to I've done like tuning forks virtually, but I
Yeah.
went to a sound bath, the actual studio,
Yes.
being immersed with other people, doing the full sound bath for an hour and a half, almost it was. And just the power of like the vibrations and how energy can move through our chakras, can open us up, can balance us, can heal us. That's not doing. That's
Yes.
not being a great communicator. That's not, being really fast and really good at what we do in our jobs. It's being present and releasing and accepting and all the things we need to learn how to do, even in the midst of a busy workday.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, I really do feel so strongly, right? Once we sort of reprogram our minds to take that pause, right? We're taking that,
Yeah.
proverbial pause. I do think it positions us to sort of function at a higher level, to be able to look at things from a different lens, right? The reaction isn't there that we would normally see. And I recognize in our world right now, I mean, everywhere we look, right? This isn't the reality that most people see. I see it everywhere. It's probably one of the reasons why I think I got so turned off on social media for so many years. I thought, my spirit can't tolerate this, right? I can't stand to see somebody that really is functioning from that place of anger and hate, and they're just frustrated, and their ability to just turn so quickly is something that I never want sort of in my purview, right? I want to eliminate that even as a possibility. And I see that so much in our world. And I think that's the truth, is that people are exposed to that everywhere they go. So there is sort of this calling for, there is a better way to do it, right? There is a better way to approach life and relationships. And let's not forget, healing is, at its core, a transfer of energy between human beings, that, it's some form of a relationship that has to happen. So this bonding has to occur for us to see the beauty behind it. And I think just sometimes in our world, we lose sight of that because, when that's all we see, sometimes that's all we experience.
Yeah. And I think deep down, and this is really the work of psychologists, right?
Right.
Deep down, many of us are just so wounded, whether it comes from our childhood or other lifetime experiences we've had. We are in pain, we are hurting, and we have to do the self reflective work to understand where that comes from. And I love some of the work that different psychologists or spiritualists have even done to say, go back and talk to that inner child,
Yes.
give that inner child a hug and tell them they're safe. Tell them it's okay. Tell them, that you forgive them, or the adult
Right.
that hurt them forgives them, or they are, that they, whatever the message is that they need to hear. So much of us are going through life where we're hardly functioning because under the surface we're just boiling. So the littlest thing sets us off. And until we close that wound, until we heal that and really understand what that wound is and where the origin of it came from, it's really hard to heal it, because otherwise it's sort of this generalized resistance or other behaviors that are seeping out. But we have to take the time. So there's so many facets to what we're doing. We don't take the time until we get present, we stop, we pause, we start to have that self-reflective journey. And then whether it's, for me, I've always been an avid book reader. So
Me too.
I went on a journey when I was at the point in my life where I was ready to say, I don't want to be this person anymore. Books and YouTube videos
Right?
and finding different people that could educate me about things. That was my way. I feel so wonderfully fortunate as a emotional intelligence coach that I can be that source for other people and help them go through that journey. But we all have to, it's all about commitment and motivation. We have to recognize and be at a place where we want to be a different person, you
Yeah,
know?
I would agree. And when you were sort of talking about that, I felt like this emotion sort of surfacing, in my own heart of just, all of the things that we were forced to do in long-term care when it came to testing and the regulations and just the way in which so many people who were just trying to do so many good things, right? To take care and protect that vulnerable population, right? How it just weighs on our souls, and I too have some healing still there, I think, to approach, because again, I try to look at from this lens of my skills, my gifts, my talents were needed at that time, right? And there was a purpose to that. And maybe that's how that's how I need to view it, right? And not look at it in any other way, because it is very challenging, right? For me, absolutely, I still have sort of those visual triggers and things that affect me greatly and profoundly, because as a caregiver, someone that is that nurse that took great pride, right, in my technical skills and my education and just making sure I could be the best person in that space. It's just really hard to sort of see and admit that I wasn't great in those situations. And that was a byproduct of just working in a place of uncertainty. I mean, nobody knew, right? And so it was so difficult and challenging. And I think that's, again, it goes back to being present, right? If we operate from a place where we're comfortable with that uneasiness, it's easier to navigate. But back then, I certainly wasn't operating anywhere near. I think if it happened now, I think it would be a much better place. My hope for caregivers and people in our field is that they will embrace some of this and they will learn to put it into their day-to-day practices, so that that next thing that happens where it's full of uncertainty and that unpredictability, and you're asked to do things that maybe you feel this internal conflict and you feel like, why am I doing that? Right? It just doesn't make logical sense, right? I remember it too. In the very beginning of COVID, I looked at my journal entry and I remember saying to like the dietary aide and the CNA, I'm like, no, I'll be the one person to go in and do it all, right? There's no reason for like 3 people to go in, back and forth and exposing, right? So, but boy, did that have an impact, right? 45 minutes later, and thinking, how am I going to get all my work done for all the other residents, right? That was our reality. And so living with that and that state of just being in that constant, like, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't be fast enough. I can't get it all done. That is how so many people felt during that time. I still feel like we're operating in that space. Even that COVID's sort of, I want to say it's taken its different turn. Nobody's returned back to that normalization.
And I don't even know if it was normal before. It's almost like the pimple that popped, but the pimple was always there.
Right.
If you think about it, anybody that goes into the helping field, we're there to help to heal others. Our focus is it's our responsibility to make it better, right? We put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to get it all done, to make it right, to be the best nurse we can possibly be. We hold ourselves up to this ridiculously high standard that when we don't meet it or even come close to reaching it, We have no self-empathy for ourselves,
Right.
right? Our empathy is always outward. We're really good at caring for others, meeting their needs,
Right.
right? We have this unrealistic expectation that we should be super women and super men, right?
Right.
And yet, what we need, it goes back to the very beginning of our conversation today. We need to put the oxygen mask on first. We need to have self-empathy, self-compassion. Instead of giving it all away to everybody else, we need to save some for ourselves, right? Because otherwise, we're always going to be so hypercritical of ourselves. We're never going to do enough. We're never going to do it right, right? We're never going to get it all done in time. We can't be perfect. Nobody's
Right.
built to be perfect, and yet we have this unrealistic expectation that perfection is the only thing that's good enough. And we have to release that. And I do think, we start to release that as we gain that self-awareness and that presence, right?
Yeah.
I'm whole. I'm good enough. I can do what I can do, but I can't do it all. But I'm going
Yeah.
to do what I can do, and I'm going to feel good about the pieces that I can do today.
And during those exchanges, right, when we're providing that care, like you said, it's such a great opportunity to really think about it from a different perspective, right? To find that place where we really are just slowing it down enough that we're allowing ourselves to like reap the benefits of that exchange and beauty that's full of healing another human being, right? Of
Yeah.
their sadness, of their pain, of their suffering. But at the same time, we do have to take care of ourselves so we can
Yeah.
continue to do this great work, right? Because we need every single healthcare worker to still stay in the fight and to recognize that, you escaping to look for something else, it's not going to give you what you need.
No. I was talking with a person who was a Reiki therapist for many years, and she walked away from it. I just had this conversation with her a week ago. She walked away from it because she felt like all of her energy she was giving away.
Yeah.
Whatever pain somebody had, she was taking it on.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to learn not to do,
Yeah.
right? We have to learn to safeguard. And I always think of it as a visual, my visualization is I'm in a safe bubble.
Yeah.
I can be an empath and I can care about others. I can care about the world, but I'm a protected bubble. You don't get to deplete my energy.
Right.
You know, there's enough energy that I can give you energy, but it doesn't deplete mine because mine always stays whole.
Correct.
And I think it's part of that just sort of visualization and mental exercising as we stay present. When you're touching someone, you might be providing care and gently washing that person or helping them do something, doing a treatment, whatever it is. But can I mentally be mindful of when I'm touching them? I'm sending them healing energy, right? Just think of that as that force field.
Yeah.
Am I sending that calming, healing energy? And when I get really present and I think about each of those things I'm doing, each step, each thing, but I connect it to that life force that we all have. Wow. It's just so much easier, one, to do it. It's no longer a checklist, a mental thing of, okay, I got to get this done in this room, then I'm going to go to this other person in this other
Right.
room. I got to stop into this. No, I'm in that moment. I'm relishing it. I'm experiencing. I'm joyful and peaceful, and I'm feeling that energy and that love just passing through me, because it's this life force that is so abundant, right? I'm never depleted.
Yeah.
And
I
I
I
think when we could do that,
yeah.
right, when we could stay there, it's nourishing to us
Yeah.
as we do those things.
I just think how lucky your students are to have you. Right? And I'm imagining as we're sitting here and you're just sharing um how we can really transform the way not only our current right workforce but the future workforce, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so
my goal.
that is your goal. I am
It's my
so
goal.
excited, right? So,
Yeah.
Veronica, I feel like we could talk for 7 hours about this topic. So please know that I'm definitely going to have you back because I don't even think we touched on stress and how that affects us. So we're gonna do another part 2, I'm sure, down the road. But before we go, because I think we just shared so much, just share with people how they can get in contact with you if they have an interest, if they really want to sort of be coached from this place of, I need to be that type of individual or person, and I know that I would benefit from having some support. Like you said, I loved how you shared very openly that you weren't wired that way. I might have somebody in mind who's very close and dear to my heart, a loved one, that I think they would so benefit just from learning that pathway as well, right? So share with everybody where they can, connect with you and learn from you, and we will definitely have to have you on again. It was just so stimulating.
Well, you could tell I love talking about this stuff. So,
Yes.
I probably the easiest way to connect up with me is just through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So find me, Veronica Barber. I'm in the Boston area. If you find somebody and it says I work for Bentley University, then you'll know that you've got the right person. I also continue to consult through Drive. So, I'm always happy just to have a conversation, or if that's coaching that you want, or consulting that you want, or you just want to have a quick conversation just with somebody that you know cares. I'm more than willing to do that.
I agree. And the work that you're doing as a consultant through Drive is extraordinary. I love sort of that idea of making a difference and helping to create a pathway for people to see it can be done, right? It's 100% in your hands, and your ability to do that. And I do miss our times together for sure. Um, Listen, it was such an enjoyable experience, and I hope that our audience really got a chance to learn a little bit about themselves and to look at things from a different perspective. I hope going forward that we can really make a difference in the way people view our field and the work that they do, and they really look at it from a lens of healing, and the incredible power that's associated with that. So join me on a future podcast. And again, a big shout out to Veronica for taking time out in her day and just engaging with the audience. I just couldn't thank you enough. I honor you, right?
As
And
I
I'm
say, namaste.
so thankful to have you in my life. I get the opportunity to have you all the time, right? So thank you, everyone. And if you don't hear it enough, thank you for all that you do in the care of the people that you serve. You are doing soul-filling, purposeful work that matters. And for that, you should be incredibly thankful. Goodbye, everyone.